Welcome, everyone. Today we'll be previewing the Minnesota Vikings. Are they the best team in the NFC North? Can that defense revert back to that dominant 2019 form? And can Kirk Cousins finally mature and perform under pressure situations? Those are the questions that we'll be asking today. So let's hit the opening bell and preview the 2021 Minnesota Vikings.
Welcome, Kings, to this edition of the Not Your Daddy's Sports Betting Podcast and Stream, presented by SportfolioKings, the future of plus EV sports betting research, where we leverage fundamental handicapping, data science, and Wall Street-style portfolio management principles to help make you a sharper, more informed bettor.
Thanks, Zach. It's preseason 2021, so if you haven't seen our previous videos, we're diving into all 32 teams over the course of the summer. Again, evaluating how these teams perform vis-a-vis market expectations and providing you with some of our preliminary thoughts, preliminary analyses, and longer-term predictions for these teams as we head in to week one in mid-September. So today, let's talk some Vikings football. I think both you and I, Zach, this is the last team that we're covering from the NFC North perspective. And this was the team that you and I are both kind of in line with the thinking that we're the most bullish, kind of the most optimistic, in which is the inverse from how we both were going into the 2020 season, where we thought this team could, compete with being, a bottom bucket team in the division, that they would perform under expectations, which they did. Started off the season 1-5, performed a little bit better over the course of the middle of the season, and then again fell down the stretch. And it wasn't really a lack of offense, but more so just a crumbling defense, marred by injuries. So really not performing up to that Zimmer defense expectation. But let's keep talking a little bit more about that 2020 team, Zach.
Yeah, so if we look at it, going into this season, remember the Vikings had all these injuries and holdouts because of COVID on the defensive front. And their defense got decimated. Danielle Hunter, Michael Pierce, all of them. So, if you look at the schedule from last season, they started 1-5. I mean, this show's gonna be me touting Mike Zimmer. I think he's one of the most underrated head coaches in the NFL. I think he knows how to just get the best out of the team he's given. And as we go through this show, there are stats and things we'll point to that kind of demonstrate last year's struggles were a talent issue, not a coaching issue. And the stats actually kind of validate that thesis. But after the Vikings went 1-5, they went 5-1. So they had a complete reversal, hit 500. That's an impressive turnaround that almost never happens in the NFL. Like, as we've talked about in previous pods, etc., and streams, kind of once it spirals out of control, snowball effect, maybe they get steady the ship a little bit, but it's just the season's lost. I think where the Vikings went wrong down the stretch is the defense has just been so decimated. It gave up 30 points to the Bears, 50 points to the Saints, 30 points to the Lions. That's not a traditional Mike Zimmer defense. And actually the Vikings defense, as you'll see, was about as bad as close to as bad as the Lions throughout a lot of the season. So that defense is going to be totally improved this season. So that's kind of why I'm going to be bullish, as you'll see, on the Vikings this season in 2021.
Yeah, the whole defensive line is different.
Yep.
And that was one of their weaknesses last year, especially being able to get pressure on the quarterback. So obviously, Danielle Hunter, one of the best, ends in the league, got hurt early on, missed pretty much the whole season, I think. Michael Pierce opted out, as you mentioned. They also signed Dalvin Tomlinson and Stephen Weatherly from the Panthers, who used to play for the Vikings. And again, the linebackers, Kendricks and Barr, they both got hurt over the course of the season. And then, a lot of, kind of turnover and experimenting in the secondary, a lot of it that just didn't work out. So, they're one of their number one draft picks, Jeff Gladney at cornerback, turned out to be a complete bust. And I think I'm pretty safe in saying that. I don't even know if he's going to get on the field this year. He's already had some domestic violence issues over the course of the offseason, and that's on top of already underperforming on the field. So when you take those two things together, just doesn't, like we talked about in some of our previous videos, how, Jeff Okudah for the Lions, his first year really underperformed, was literally one of the worst cornerbacks in the league, but has a high ceiling. He could rebound. That was just, that's on the field performance under a toxic environment, and now moving into a new one, and maybe he can reach potential. Do not feel the same way about Jeff Gladney at all. In fact, I'd probably just write him off. But yeah, Patrick Peterson, Cam Dantzler was a rookie last year as well, and he actually really outperformed expectations. They also brought Mackenzie Alexander back from the Bengals, and again, he was on the Vikings in 2019. He was actually a big loss, and then got hurt and underperformed with the Bengals, so now he's back with the Vikings. So you can just see this whole defense has really been shored up. The 2019 defense, which was so good, was not the 2020 defense. I mean, just the same personnel was not even on the field. Yeah. So that's going to be a big change. And again, that was, as you mentioned, Zach, that was their weakness. It wasn't the offense per se. And so when we look at just this chart, we're looking at, the super contest betting trends, just how the market perceived the Vikings and how that perception of the Vikings evolved over the course of the season. Again, just a quick reminder, in this instance of this chart, the yellow bars are lines where the Vikings covered the spread. Purple lines are the line indicate the Vikings did not cover the spread. And then the size of that bar indicates how much support they got from the market. And so we can see, I believe week one, it was very split between Vikings and Packers. It was pretty much even. And then that second week versus the Colts, we can see dramatically underperformed expectation that, that red dot is the opening or is the closing spread. And then the colored dot, either yellow or purple, is going to signify the actual outcome of that game. So we can see they dramatically underperformed that red dot in week two. That was versus the Colts. I think they were a short favorite here, implying, they were a -2, -3, and or a slight underdog, and they lost 28-11. And that was with considerable market support. So people loved the Vikings week two. And as we talked about in a previous pod, and we're going to continue to evaluate and really dive into this research here to see if we can unearth, a really powerful predictive signal for this season, is when the market buys into a team and kind of they all pile in and they all lose their money, then does that meaningfully adjust next week's market expectations for that team, because the market basically abandons them? And so we can see here, massive market support for the Vikings week two. Week three, they, 10% lower.
And to give you, and I agree with that, to give you context to that week two, why it's baffling, it was a complete one-sided overreaction to the Colts losing to the Jaguars week one. Now, this is the problem with that kind of market thesis, is in week one, right, Green Bay Vikings, the market was split. Sharps, like us, we were on Green Bay, no problem. We thought the line was 6 points wrong. And obviously the Colts stubbed their toe, but actually played very well versus the Jags. I think they had no punts in that game, and the ball didn't bounce their way, and Jags took advantage and pulled it out. So the problem with that week one game with the Vikings is Packers dominated that game. Vikings had a late comeback that wasn't even a comeback. Like the game was out of hand. They just scored some late touchdowns. So it just made it look like the Vikings were like really good.
Garbage points.
It was garbage points. So week 2 was just like, Colts lost to the Jags. It must be the worst team in the NFL. Vikings, scored 30 points versus the Packers. Oh my God. So it just and it was a complete opposite. The offense couldn't do anything versus the Colts. It was terrible. Yeah, just kind of want to highlight the context around that market move.
Yeah, so you could see everyone probably sold off the Colts, thought they were trash because they lost to the Jags, and then piled into the Vikings. And we see we're disappointed, meaningfully so. So weren't really even competitive, and so we see the markets, kind of moves away from the Vikings in week 3, and of course, as the market moves away from the Vikings, after the Vikings they suck, then they cover. Then they covered again. And we see they got a little bit market support, but not everyone bought into them. And then they covered again, and then everyone kind of supported them. And then we can see again, once the market really starts to reach kind of this fever pitch, the macro view of the team starts to shift, then it's yanks it right back. And the Vikings get smashed week 6 here. It looks like they were expected to win the game by, 2-3 points. Ended up losing, by 17. So I think that was
the Falcons.
When was that? Falcons, yeah.
Yeah.
Just demolished.
And it makes sense. If you look at these teams they played early in the season, teams that could put up a lot of points, they really struggled with. Titans, Seahawks, Falcons, it's just that defense, man. It's just, and that's, and again, the reason we're talking about this is you need to understand the past. So it's kind of like history, right? You can't understand the future of your world if you don't understand the history of what came before. So the reason this is important is because what you have to ask yourself is this: going into 2021, are the Vikings going to be better or worse, very simply, than in 2020? Well, the offense is probably going to be about the same. We'll talk more about that. The defense that we're kind of talking about already is definitely improved. It's one of the most improved units in the NFL, in my opinion. So that fact alone, with a seasoned coach who has a track record of having a top 5, top 10 defense at worst, I mean, if this team, hits that top 10 defense, if it hits its top 5 defense, I mean, with that offense last year, this team is definitely going to hit 9 wins. Their total's 8.5. Likely going to hit 10 or 11. So it makes complete sense to me looking at the history of the Vikings last year and comparing it to next season is one of the most clear teams to me. This 2021 offseason.
And we can see again, so expectations are much lower for the Vikings this year than this time last year. Another good example too, just relative to the North. We just finished up recording on the Packers. Packers, estimated wins are 10.5. And we'll get to that. And we'll see, Vikings, expectations are lower than that. So let's dive into now the stats. Just look a little bit, flesh out a little bit more of these details for the Vikings and last year. And I think we can see us just start to quantify some of these qualitative observations that we made. Defense 29th in points, 28th in sack rate. Again, they just could not get to the quarterback. Again, we basically have a totally fresh, totally new defensive line. So again, you can kind of write that off. It is not going to be a leading indicator for next season. Takeaways, and another kind of downstream outcome of just having a defense that was not at full health, did not have all personnel even at their disposal over the course of the season. Just a lot of, adversity. The other thing is what we haven't really talked about a lot on any of our pods yet as well. And I know we're not huge fans of, home field advantage and what that may be worth. I think it's fair to say the Vikings home, especially the noise, if there is, a considerable crowd there, can have an effect on the other team's offense in select instances. And they did not get that benefit last year at all. And so, that could have, that could play a part in select games, in select instances, that can have a material effect of actually changing the outcome of games. So that's, another worthwhile point adding specifically about the Vikings because of their dome situation. And then we can see on the offensive side, as we mentioned, again, like nothing mind blowing. But again, like we can see that the offense was not the reason why they were necessarily losing games. I mean, not great on the giveaways side. We're turning the ball over definitely more so than league average, and leaned on the rush a little bit more so than the broader kind of trajectory of the league. But again, Adam Thielen, he missed some games last year. Justin Jefferson, who turned out to be, again, like one of the best wide receivers in the game now, he did not emerge immediately. So it was, 3, 4, 5 weeks into the season when he really started to demonstrate himself as he is. And so I think when you have that full, collection of weapons, again, obviously if they can stay healthy, that can be pretty powerful. Again, at running back, obviously Dalvin Cook complemented by Alexander Madison, always a nice, 1-2 punch there. And if Kirk Cousins can just have just an all-around great season, that could make the Vikings not just NFC North winners, that could make them, NFC winners.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the question is going to be, can Kirk Cousins be more than Andy Dalton? And, Andy Dalton, I think he gets a bad rap, but I mean, he was a decent quarterback for a good team for 6-7 years. I think Cousins in that similar mold is he's never going to be a top 10 QB, but can he reach top 12 in a season to push a good team over the top to get to a Super Bowl? Kind of like a Nick Foles, right? Like, can he be situated perfectly, hit it right, get to the Super Bowl, win it, right? I think Cousins could do it. It's just he is completely reliant on his team setting him up for success. That's just where he thrives. And that's why, Gary Kubiak left, but his son takes over. But I actually think that might
be. Yeah, and actually on that point, before you let's move on and let's talk about some of those key adds and losses.
Yeah, so I think with Clint Kubiak coming in, I think you have an opportunity where you take the best of Gary Kubiak, but then open it up to where Clint's not going to be afraid to try something different or new or out of the box on top of it, which I think will be beneficial to Cousins and the offense. So they're going to do what works. I mean, Mike Zimmer wants to run the ball. He wants to pound Dalvin Cook. He wants to get a lead early. He does not want Kirk Cousins to come from behind and all that jazz. So, I don't know. I think that could be a net benefit as the season progresses, having the younger Kubiak kind of take over, kind of like a Kyle Shanahan for Mike Shanahan, right? Like, kind of like Kyle Shanahan's probably a better coach than Mike Shanahan from a like X's and O's standpoint. Obviously, Mike Shanahan was like a really good head coach. And then key additions, I mean, they basically revamped their entire secondary, and like we've already talked about, like a lot of injuries are coming back. So, I mean, it's really a completely different defense. Like but like completely different, but way better. Like just like players and talent. So again, there's no way the defense can be worse than it was last year just because of those upgrades. It's just the question is how much better is it really going to be, and how long is it going to take to get it to where it's going to end up? That to me is the key question.
Yeah, and I think Patrick Peterson, took a step back last year. He's obviously getting older. He's in his, 9th year in the league. Very rare cornerbacks really even last that long. So he's already had, an elite career. And I believe, the Cardinals defense last year relied a lot more on man coverage, which, focuses on the speed, agility, and legs of a cornerback. And which is not his strengths anymore. It's more or less his strengths are his scheme. He can obviously, in his experience in being able how to defend, not necessarily relying on his raw athleticism anymore. And so this defense, particularly in Zimmer's defense, is going to, position him to rely on his strengths and less on his weaknesses more so. So you could see what people could interpret as, some sort of resurgence from Patrick Peterson this year. And if that is the case, that would be a big add. Obviously Bashan Breeland, again, like as I talked about, bringing Mackenzie Alexander back. He's well familiar with the system, and some of the defensive linemen, again, a wholly fresh new defensive line. And again, still strong linebacking core. Everything is really set up for the Vikings defense to be a lot more reminiscent of that 2018, 2019 version, much less so. The 2020 should be like a total outlier, and so that means that could create opportunity again for the broader kind of betting public who, doesn't necessarily, do a deep dive to this layer of analysis and think that, well, the Vikings defense, they used to be good, they're kind of washed now, and this just isn't going to be the same defense, and Kirk Cousins, he sucks. And that's kind of like the broader market perspective. So like, let's move into 2021 now and see how we think that, again, this refreshed team with a rejuvenated defense, and again, sufficiently potent enough quarterback can perform over 2021.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at it, the schedule looks super favorable early in the season. They have a tough game with Seahawks, Browns, Cardinals, but very well could end up 3-3 at worst through the first 6 weeks, which is a definite improvement from last year's 1-5. As the season progresses, they play Ravens, Chargers, Packers, 49ers, Lions, Steelers. It definitely gets tougher that mid-stretch of the season. But I definitely could see a 4-2 Vikings team before they get into that tough part. Kind of maybe linger around a 7-5 through the last 3-4 weeks of the season, which then they play the Bears, Rams, Packers, and Bears again. So if really it's gonna, honestly, it's, I hate to say it, but I think the Vikings hitting over the 8.5 is gonna come down to, can they beat the Bears twice? If they beat the Bears twice, they're gonna go over it, no problem. So and then obviously make the playoffs very probably. So plus 130, if you're getting plus money on the Vikings to make the playoffs, the NFC West is really the only competition to steal some wild card spots, I think. So they're going to beat up on each other, so it's going to be tough for any of those teams to have over 10, 11 wins. So Vikings are going to be right there in the mix. Definitely to make the playoffs. I think that's a super sweet gig. And if something happened to Tom Brady and the Bucs, I'm very bullish on the Bucs this season again. NFC's up for grabs. Like, could be the Rams, could be the 49ers, could be Seahawks, could be the Packers, could be, I don't know, could be the Vikings. So, if you're getting plus 4,000, some ridiculous line.
That's attractive.
If you wanted to sprinkle a little bit, and again, I like these longer lines, I don't necessarily bet them to say, I think the Vikings are going to win the Super Bowl. Like, can they get there? Because if I can get plus 4,000 on a team to get to the event, to get to the game, if they're playing the Chiefs, I'll just reverse the position if I want, or hedge it, or make money both ways. Like, I love being in that type of position. Like if you like the Vikings a little bit, I'd recommend sprinkle a little bit on a Super Bowl just for have a small ticket with a nice return if it gets there. So,
well, because again, plus 4,000, it's saying well, do the Vikings have a 2.5% chance of winning the Super Bowl? And if you think that the Vikings have a 5% chance of winning the Super Bowl, well, then plus 4,000 is a slam dunk bet for you.
Well, and I qualify it with, forget winning it. Do they have a 5% chance of getting there? That's all I care about. And so,
yeah.
5%, I think so. I think that's a good number. 5-6%.
Yeah. And again, depending on how tactical and sophisticated you wanted to get with it, you could start hedging even sooner than that, because you could basically say, you have a sufficient amount say you bet $100, you have $4,000 essentially to kind of like play with. If you wanted to do it 2 games out, if the Vikings were in the playoffs, for instance, you can say, all right, I'm going to put $1,000 on the other team to win this game. You lose. All right, now you're down 1,000. So now you have $3,000 left of potential bankroll left to play to hedge against that exposure. So definitely another alternative opportunity. But the plus 4,000 is so much more attractive than the Packers right now at plus 1,600. I mean, the Vikings, I feel like, are positioned far more attractively than the Packers are right now. I mean, again, it was only just a few years ago when, the Vikings, were, just a few plays away from being in the NFC Championship. And, you don't know where it kind of can go from there. I think they have the Kirk Cousins. When he has a good game, he has a really good game. And it's just, sometimes he just doesn't show up. And especially in, particularly pressure situations, I think well documented on Monday Night Football, is like 1 in 8 or 1 in 9 or something like that. But, if you can overcome those types of kind of resistance levels in his career, that could mean the Vikings could take a meaningful step forward. And that's why I think the over 8.5 is definitely attractive. Plus 4,000 is attractive. I would have to see too, like just what the Vikings winning the NFC looks like. I imagine it's in the plus 2,000 or so range. So that would be attractive to me as well, especially if they can stay healthy, which is obviously tough. But again, the wide receivers are good. You have an elite wide receiver group with Jefferson and Thielen. And Cousins has such great chemistry with Thielen already, and Jefferson can take off the top. And then if Irv Smith can kind of come into his own as a receiving tight end. And then again, just the 1-2 punch of Dalvin Cook, who is a top 5 running back. Again, with Madison right behind him, who can play just as well sometimes, especially in certain situations. And then just as we keep pounding the table on this rejuvenated defense, I feel like the Vikings are flying way under the radar. And if you have a bad showing from the Bears, which can happen, it looks like you're going to have a bad showing from the Lions for sure. And then say again, if Aaron Rodgers doesn't, if Aaron Rodgers doesn't come back, that changes all of this thing, because you could get 5 wins right there. Yeah. Again, the one kind of overarching macro view of all these teams we've reviewed in the NFC North, I would say, is this division has a particularly tough schedule this year. So playing a lot of tough interconference and also AFC opponents. So I think, like we've talked about with the Bears, with the Packers, and also with the Vikings, the schedule is not playing any of these teams any favors. So they're going to have to overcome that in order to achieve some of these objectives. And I'm sure we'll get to the teams eventually who have, easier schedules. But yeah, the NFC North is not one of those divisions.
That's fair. And so is there, we're pretty bullish, I think, on the Vikings, especially at 8.5. And no one's even talking about them. And again, last year in that first game of the season, it was a pick'em, right? So Vikings were at home, I believe, and the line was 2.5 open. And so basically it's saying that, these teams are equal, which anyone with, that was paying attention knew it wasn't even close. But this year, it's like they forgot the Vikings exist. Like, it's not the same team as last year. It's better. The offense was actually Kirk Cousins had like his best year last year, and the Vikings offense had like their best offense they've ever had. Not ever, but in the Kirk Cousins, Mike Zimmer timeline.
No, Kirk Cousins legit did have one of his best careers, or one of his best years of his career from a statistics perspective. He actually was second in the league in quarterback rating.
That's impressive.
So,
Well, and that's the thing, when the run is working, when they're able to, get in front, and he can just be efficient, and he's got weapons down the field, like, he can play like a top 12 quarterback. And if he does that this year, and that defense is kind of squeaks its way into the top 5, the team could win 12 games and be in the running for, some some home games in the playoffs and maybe sneak into the NFC Championship game. So,
and I think also the wrinkle here that you talked about is going to play a pretty big factor in determining the trajectory of the Vikings offense is going to be the QB factor. So how does that play? Is he going to be additive, and not, young and experienced kind of and detracts, and causes, some friction within the offense. So I think, great video on the Vikings. Again, we're both bullish, definitely like the Vikings more so than any team in the NFC North. So that wraps up today's episode. Be sure to like and subscribe. Check out the Sportfolio Kings platform at sportfoliokings.com. We're still in the beta version, but as the summer kind of continues to warm up and we get into the fall before week 1, we're going to have, the website and our broader tool chest, back or up and online for everyone to start to check out. We're going to have some really cool, market-oriented research. We're building out a custom market signal dashboard to help you make those sharper, more informed bets over the course of the season. And then we'll also be offering our own in-house managed sportfolios, which we have been managing for the last 2 to 3 years. We have the performance posted on our website today. And we'll be providing all of that for free to our subscribers all season long. So like we opened, and as you can probably tell, this is not your daddy's sports betting. So get out there and take your bookie to the woodshed.
And king me.